All right, so we're looking at the book of Deuteronomy. And when we talk about Deuteronomy, I don't want to commit the etymological fallacies act, but when you look at the pieces of the word, Deutero and Namas, drew my line in the wrong place. What's that?
It's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, don't do that. But if you break up the word here, Deutero means second, and Namas means law. So Deuteronomy is very literally the second law. And I think that's actually a helpful way to look at it because it is essentially a repetition of the first law. You remember last week we talked about Numbers and the generation that had to wander in the wilderness had to die. That was the whole thing about the book of Numbers. And so this Deuteronomy is Moses giving that same law, that same covenant to the next generation, to the new generation. And so it is the second law because it's kind of a repeat, but to the new generation before they go into the promised land, to help them see how do these laws apply when we're living in the land instead of living in the desert. But for a historical background, like we normally start with, there's a very famous text, archaeological discovery, that we can compare and give some insights to the book of Deuteronomy. And this is Hammurabi's Code. Let me pull it up here. Hammurabi's Code. Now, you may be thinking, is that misspelled? Hey, technically, the P is more accurate, but if you say it fast enough, you can't tell the difference whether it's a B or a P. So, Hammurabi's Code, hear that? To say it so fast. Right? This is the most famous legal code of the Mesopotamian sort of history. Right? And so, Hammurabi's Code can be dated pretty far back. It's dated to the reign of a guy named Hammurabi, right? And so he was the 6th ruler of the first dynasty of Babylon, which all that means is it was a long time ago. He ruled from 1792 BC to 1750 BC. That's a pretty long reign as far as kings go. Very influential, now very famous because of this. The one on the picture on the right side here, this is actually, the left is a close-up view of what's on the face of this stone. But this big obelisk, is what it's called when you have a big stone pillar like this, is the full version of the law. And it's about as tall as a person, or maybe taller, depending on who that person is. But it's a pretty large pillar. And the amazing thing is this intricate lettering that's been done, carving it into that obelisk all the way down. And so this law code that's written on this stone here contains a prologue and an epilogue, and in between there, 282 laws. What's interesting is, when did we say that the book of Deuteronomy was, or the books of Moses were probably written? Around the time of the Exodus? What year was that? Anybody remember?
1446.
That's it. 1446 BC. How big of a difference is there between these two, if those dates are all correct? Roughly 300 years. Roughly 300 years. So what that means is, we'll look at them, but there are similarities between these two documents. Let me go ahead and pass some of these around. If you have good eyes and can read well, there's two that are longer and smaller text. So take those for me. Otherwise, it's short text that are big on the handout. But there are similarities and differences between these two sets of documents. And that means that when Moses wrote Deuteronomy, and this applies to Exodus and Leviticus as well to some degree, when Moses wrote this, he was aware of other legal traditions like this one. Now, there are other ones too. This isn't the only one. And it was the standard way that laws were written at the time. Some similar cases come up, some similar language comes up. But what it gives us the benefit of is to see how Moses and how God does something different than what was the standard practice at the time. And when we can see those differences, we actually get better insight into the unique thing that God is doing, the unique way God frames the law, and what that tells us, about God, and about His people. So let's look at a couple of examples. Whoever has at the top of their page, it says number 1, like framing, and I'll put it on the screen here as well so everyone else can kind of follow along. But whoever has number 1, framing of the law with Hammurabi's code, could you read that for me?
At that time, Annam and Enlil named me to promote the welfare of the people, me, Hammurabi, the devout, God-fearing prince, to cause justice to prevail on the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, that the strong might not oppress the weak, to rise like the sun over the black-headed people, and to light up the land. Hammurabi, the shepherd, called by Enlil, am I, the one who makes affluence and plenty abound, who provides in abundance all sorts of things for Deuteronomy.
Thank you. So notice in here that Hammurabi intends to promote welfare. His goal is for justice, to get rid of evil. Those things are some things we kind of hear in the law, even to the point of saying that the strong might not oppress the weak. But one of the questions I want you to think about as we read some of the rest of it in a minute is, does he actually accomplish that relative to what we see in Deuteronomy? So I want to read a comparable section from Deuteronomy. Whoever has the number 1 framing of the law that has Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 5 through 14. Everyone else, you can turn your Bible if you would like. But whoever has the handout can go ahead and read that for me. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 5 through 14.
But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. See, I have taught you statutes and judgment, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do thus in the land where you are entering to possess it. So keep and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the people who hear all these statutes and sayings. Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it, as it is our Lord God, whenever we call on Him? Or what great nation there is that has statutes and judgment as righteous as the whole law which I am setting before you today? Only give heed to yourself and keep your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, and they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and grandsons. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, and the Lord said to me, assemble their people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens, darkness, clouds, and thick gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. He heard the sound of the words, but you saw no form, only a voice. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform. That is, the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. The Lord commanded me at that time to teach your statutes and judgments, that you might perform them in the land where you are going over to possess it.
Thank you. So, does this right here have mentioned any kind of language about covenant or anything about building any kind of relationship with the gods? Or how are the gods talked about in that Hammurabi's code there? Anything special going on there? There's not really, right? They're just kind of like appointing him, and he's kind of doing it all, right? The point of the law is just justice. It's simply to get rid of evil and keep things in order. But the point of the biblical law isn't simply justice. It is justice, but it's justice because that maintains a right relationship with God in the covenant. All right, so we have a covenant framing of the law when it comes to Deuteronomy, versus Hammurabi's code is very social, very pragmatic. Right? So let's look at our next one. Who has the heading false witnesses / perjury?
I do.
Okay, and do you have the one from Hammurabi as well, or from Deuteronomy?
I got one. Hammurabi.
Perfect. Could you read that for us? Yes, please.
If a nobleman came forward with false testimony in a case and has not proved the word which he spoke, if that case was a case involving life, that nobleman shall be put to death.
Now, who has the number 2 for Deuteronomy? All right, go ahead and read that for us.
If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office with them in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity, it shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I forgot to tell you what verses that she was reading. She's reading Deuteronomy 19, verses 16 through 21. Deuteronomy 19, 16 through 21. So if you don't mind, could you read that again so everybody can follow along my fault?
If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him what he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity, it shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Okay. Any differences that you notice? Or any similarities?
Well, one lets the judgment be by the judges, and the other one is like, this is it, and this is what happened.
Sure. Yeah, there's an interesting difference. It does seem like this language of false testimony in a case it has not proved maybe implies that there's some kind of judge evaluating the case. But in the case of verse 17, for example, the people are supposed to stand in the presence of the Lord as the ultimate judge, not simply the priests and judges at the time. Those guys are there, but theoretically, the Lord is meant to be there as well. And the language of a careful investigation. But nonetheless, there is kind of a similarity. That verse 21 there, which we'll look at in a second, is similar. There are consequences. Pretty severe depending on what you're lying about. In this case, the lie is about someone's life or death, and life or death follows. And that's very similar to verse 21. So there's some similarities here in that there's a severe punishment for false witness. The difference being Deuteronomy is connected to covenant and justice of God versus just society, social function. Okay, let's look at the third one. Who has number 3, lex talionis for Hammurabi? And I'll write that here on the board. Who has that one? Okay. 1 second.
The nobleman has destroyed the eye of a member of the aristocracy, they shall destroy his eye. If he has broken another nobleman's bone, they shall break his bone. If he has destroyed the eye of a commoner or broken the bone of a commoner, he shall pay 1 mina of silver. If he has destroyed the eye of a nobleman's slave or broken the bone of a nobleman's slave, he shall pay 1/2 his value. If a nobleman has knocked out a tooth of a nobleman on his own ring, they shall knock out his tooth. If he has knocked out a commoner's tooth, he shall pay 1/3 mina of silver.
Okay. And now who has number 3 for Deuteronomy? Okay.
Your eye shall not pity, it shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
What's the difference in those? This is obviously a little more drawn out and makes some distinctions. What are the distinctions that Hammurabi makes?
Classes of people.
Yeah, and let me give you just a little bit of background here. This phrase nobleman is actually just the best way to say there's a technical term, like awilu, I think is the name, and it refers to like somebody of the upper class, and generally refers to like a male and then his family falls under him as far as the society is concerned. And so it strictly refers to somebody that is someone of certain note, certain class, right? And so notice that if you harm somebody that is noble, is higher rank socially, then the punishment is equal, is the same. But if you get down here and you do something to a commoner, it's not as big a deal. It's penalty. And if you come down here and you do something to a slave, it's even less. It's interesting, right? But what distinctions does Deuteronomy 19:21 make?
Everyone's the same.
Take no pity.
Makes no distinctions.
Yeah.
Doesn't make a distinction. And in that, you can see the way that Deuteronomy, compared to Hammurabi, is valuing every life as having innate value of the same sort, right? All lives bearing the image of God. It connects back to what we saw in Genesis, right? Now, if you think back to some of the creation myths we read from like Babylon and Mesopotamia, where the gods created people to do the work for them, they got annoyed with them, that kind of thing. This can work better with that kind of creation story. But scriptural creation story makes more sense with Deuteronomy that puts value in every life and doesn't make distinctions as far as justice is concerned. All right, who has number 4 with the goring ox?
I do.
Okay, give me 1 second to change the slide. Okay, go ahead with the Hammurabi part.
If an ox, when it was walking down along the street, gored a nobleman to death, that case is not subject to claim. If a nobleman's ox was a gorer and his city council made it known to him that it was a gorer, but he did not pad its horns or tie up his ox, and that ox gored to death a member of the
Aristocracy.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
He shall give 1/2 mina of silver. If it was a nobleman's slave, he shall give 1/3 mina of silver.
Okay. So you see some similar distinctions, right? We got the nobleman is mentioned again. In this case, we have the city council comes up, so there's some kind of council. Talking about this ox that gets out, we have again a distinction with a slave compared to a nobleman. All right, so who has number 4?
I don't know, if you're an old man, you get gored to death, you're out of luck.
Yeah, it's just
That's what it
tough,
says
right?
in the verse.
Right.
That sounds pretty low on the totem
Just
pole.
walking along the street, just so happens accidental, you got no recompense. Right.
Put the pads on his horn.
So I want you to pay attention when we read this section from Exodus, which Deuteronomy assumes, because Exodus came first, we're just going to look at a specific case. Notice what happens that's different when an ox, let's say accidentally, like first case here, accidentally gores someone to death. So Exodus chapter 21, 28, who has that one?
I got that.
Okay.
If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner had been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. Whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox gores a male or a female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it up, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his.
That's all good right there, thank you. So what's different about these two descriptions? So in that case, nothing happens to animal or person. But in verse 28, what happens if an ox gores a person to death?
The ox.
The ox is stoned. Right? The owner, like in this case, the owner is like not harmed, but the ox is killed. That's interesting. There is a penalty there. There's no situation where a death doesn't have some kind of penalty, right? Which does seem to raise the value of a life in some shape or form. What else did you notice? There's a distinction that Deuteronomy makes that Hammurabi does not.
Foreknowledge can lead to some more severe consequences in Exodus.
Yes. So in Deuteronomy, there's this, and we talked about this in Leviticus a couple weeks ago. There is the concept of unintentional sin, and that still demands some kind of justice, right? And then there's intentional sin or sin of neglect, which demands like greater justice. And that seems to sort of tie together here, except again, it's just money, right? And then there's one other distinction that Deuteronomy makes that Hammurabi does not. Yes. In the Hebrew text, it doesn't just say like humans, it says man or woman. It explicitly breaks that out. And also, it makes the distinction son or daughter, right? In verse 31. Which is interesting. In Hammurabi's concept, right, the structure of society is patriarchal, which it largely was in ancient Israel as well. But women don't get any specific mention, right? But in Deuteronomy, it is equal value, even if it's socially, there's a structure that's patriarchal. As far as God is concerned, the value of people, men and women both have the same value, right? If they are killed by an ox, it warrants the same punishment. And the same is true for a son or a daughter. So children are in the same boat, whether male or female. Right? A life is of a certain value in Deuteronomy, and all lives are, where there are much more distinctions for class and gender in Hammurabi's code. God created all of humanity, male and female, in his image, and they bear the value of that image. We got one more, and that's number 5, concern for the vulnerable. Who has the Hammurabi one?
I do.
All right, give me 1 second. So let me flip the slide. Well, we got 2 slides here of these laws, and then we'll look over at Deuteronomy 24. So whoever has Hammurabi's code there for number 5 can go ahead.
All of it?
If you can. You can
I just did
You can share it if you want to share the load.
Oh,
but go
they
ahead.
passed it on.
Oh, you got something. Well, thank you for your sacrifice.
However, if the father during his lifetime has never said, my children, to the children whom the slave bore him, after the father has gone to his fate, the children of the slave may not share in the goods of the parental estate, along with the children of the first wife. Freedom for the slave and her children shall be effected with the children of the first wife, having no claim at all against the children of the slave for servants. If her husband did not give her a marriage gift, they shall make good her dowry to her, and she shall obtain the goods of her husband's estate, a portion corresponding to that of an individual heir. If her children keep plaguing her in order to make her leave the house, the judges shall investigate her record and place the blame on the children, so that the woman need never leave her husband's house.
Bunch of ungrateful children.
If a young man who adopted a boy and reared him, set up a family of his own, has later acquired children, and so that has made up his mind to cut off the foster child, that the son shall not go off empty-handed, his foster father shall give him from his goods his 1/3 patrimony, and then he shall go off, since he may not give him any of the field, orchard, or house. If the adopted son of a chamberlain or the adopted son of a votary has said to the foster father or his foster mother, you are not my father, you are not my mother, they shall cut out his tongue. If the adopted son of a chamberlain or the adopted son of a votary found out his parentage and came to hate his foster father and his foster mother, and so has gone off to his parental home, they shall pluck out his eyes.
Alright. Children, not a lot of grace.
I'm glad I didn't live back then.
And that's where
We're far off.
dysfunctional family comes from.
Yeah. Alright, Deuteronomy 24, who has number 5 for Deuteronomy? It's Deuteronomy 24, verses 14 and following.
You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cries against you to the Lord, and you be guilty of sin. You shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this.
Thank you. So what's some of the differences there between how the vulnerable populations are considered? There's something like, there's a whole category that doesn't exist in Hammurabi's Code that exists in Deuteronomy, first of all. And what about verses 17 in particular, verse 17 in particular? Hammurabi's Code says nothing about helping out the hired worker or the slave, the servant. Nothing. Like those folks don't get many rights, don't get many protections, and their life is worth less. You only have to pay like half as much or a third as much if something happens to them. And so the poor and needy don't have the same protections that they do in verse 14 of Deuteronomy 24. Where it says don't oppress the hired worker. And you remember at the beginning in the prologue, Hammurabi said he was going to try to protect the weak from the strong. But when you compare that to the way that Deuteronomy actually does that explicitly, it seems that as far as we're concerned in the eyes of God, like that law falls short. And ends up actually protecting those of higher class, rather than the other way around. And then in 17, the idea that you can't deny justice, whether to an orphan or to somebody who moved in from out of town. The people that joined Israel that were not of the same lineage, those people can't be mistreated, nor a widow. And those are not super protected. There are laws about how the inheritance is supposed to be shared and passed along here. So it's not like they don't think about the orphans, the widows, stuff like that. They do. But the concern is always very pragmatic about the inheritance of who gets the money, right? And that's inconsistent in these things. Whereas in Deuteronomy, justice is defined as livelihood and well-being more so for children, men, and women. And so between the two, and that's our whole comparison there, between these two, what we see in Deuteronomy is a concept of justice that is covenantal, and in legal terms, egalitarian. Right? Whereas in Hammurabi's Code, we have hierarchical. I think I may have spelled that wrong. Whatever. 2 H's? How many H's are in that? And
I before you accept that.
really?
Yes, that's right.
Alright, and then I got like 4 H's in there. So hierarchical and pragmatic. So in this case, justice is motivated and defined by social classes and for certain like outcomes of money and status and order. Whereas in Deuteronomy, it is about relationship with God and equal valuing of all human life. Right? So there's a distinct difference, and comparing them helps us actually see the beauty of God's law and the value that God places on us in covenant relationship with Him in a way that we wouldn't maybe recognize otherwise. Okay? So that's our history section. want to do a little bit of a look at, help you understand the structure of Deuteronomy a little bit. Deuteronomy is basically just 3 of Moses' speeches. Right? He just gets up on his like soapbox and goes to town talking to the second generation of Israel. They're sitting out in the wilderness. They got nothing else to do, right? They got to listen. And so the first speech begins, I think in chapter 5 is what I have. The first speech actually starts off in chapter 1. The second speech is chapter 5.
You think they had a family dispute, why would you go listen to the speech?
Yeah.
I don't want to go.
Yeah, I don't want to.
I don't like that, Dad.
You're right. This movie's too long. This movie's too boring.
Can't make me.
Right. They didn't exactly have an Xbox back in the 10th, though. So. All right, so we have the first speech, the second speech. I'll tell you a little bit about what's in each one in a second. The second speech, which is the longest. And the third, of course. After the third is just Moses' last words and the story of him passing away. Right. So the last few chapters are reserved for that. The 29 and 30 is kind of his closing. You guys remember a couple weeks ago when we talked about Exodus, we talked about the Suzerain Vassal Treaty. It comes back up in Deuteronomy because his speeches are essentially structured according to the covenant again. He does like the same structure as he did with Israel to begin with, as God did with Israel to begin with, because he is helping renew the same covenant with the next generation. And so in this first part, we have a preamble where he introduces who he is, who God is. We have the historical prologue, which is actually a bit longer in Deuteronomy. And this is the part of Deuteronomy where Moses essentially reviews the entire story up to this point. So if you need the Cliff Notes version of the first 4 books of the Old Testament, you read the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy. So he gives this historical prologue about how God has been redeeming them from among all the nations and is using them. And then he intros the stipulations to the covenant. Intros the stipulations. And says, I'm about to list for you all the things you need to do to maintain this covenant. But what's really interesting about Deuteronomy is this middle part is essentially an exposition of the 10 Commandments. You can go piece by piece. And he's going to tell you what the stipulations are, the 10 Commandments, and then he spends chapters upon chapters explaining how the 10 Commandments, roughly speaking, would apply when they live in the land. Because the situation is about to change, and he's trying to help them out. So the 10 Commandments are explained and applied in that middle section. And at the end, in chapter 27 and 28, which you can turn there, I want you to just look at the headings that you see in your Bible in chapter 27 and 28. It'll give you the sense of what we're looking at here. But along with stipulations comes the consequences if you break those stipulations. So what are some of the headings in 27 and 28?
Covenant curses.
Right. And after that?
Israel to build an altar.
There are curses and blessings. They do have the stones, and we get to some of the other altar stuff at a certain point. But we have the curses, we have the blessings, and then we actually go back to the curses in chapter 28, just to be very clear, what the consequences are if you fall short. And what's amazing about how this sets us up for the rest of the biblical narrative is he essentially tells them, hey guys, if you don't keep the 10 Commandments applied broadly to your whole life in the land, then you are going to be kicked out of the land. Right? Because the people that are in there now they are not following you. They can be kicked out. It's their punishment for their sin. And we're going to move you in. But if you become like them, if you become like the people that I'm kicking out, I'll kick you out too. In the rest of the story of Israel, as we go through Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles kind of overlaps the other ones. The whole story is about how they struggle to keep these stipulations of the covenant. And God is gracious, God is merciful, God is patient. But it becomes so bad that at the end of 1st Kings, at the end of 2nd Kings, he kicks them out. Babylon comes in, conquers them, exiles them to Babylon. And so it's interesting to notice the way that Deuteronomy, and the way that Moses is kind of a prophet and priest, essentially projects for Israel its future. And sets before them very clearly that if they obey, he will bless them. And he does that with David, with Hezekiah, with Josiah, these good kings. He blesses them. But when they fall into idolatry, they end up facing consequences. So that's like the big picture idea of Deuteronomy. But I want to do a couple themes real quick. So let me get some volunteers to read a few verses. I need Deuteronomy 5, 1 through 3. Just volunteer whenever you're ready.
I can do that.
Okay, and then I need 26, 16 through 19.
Wait.
Alright, and then I need 29, 1 through 15. I'll read that one, it's a little bit longer. And then I need 30, 11 through 20.
Okay.
Okay? So let's go ahead and start with that one.
Moses called all the people of Israel together and said, "Listen carefully, Israel. Hear the decrees and regulations I give you today, so you may learn them and obey them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Mount Sinai. The Lord did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive today. At the mountain the Lord spoke to you face to face in the heart of the fire. I stood as an intermediary between you and the Lord, for you are afraid of the fire and did not want to approach the mountain. He spoke to me, and I passed his words on to you."
Okay, that's good right there. So covenant renewal is the theme that starts here in chapter 5, where he says, look, we've done this before. I'm telling you where we've done before. We're going to do it again here. So 26, 16 through 19.
This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and rules. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, and keep his statutes and his commandments and his rules, and will obey his voice. And the Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession, and he has promised you, and that you are to keep all his commandments, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor, high above all nations, and that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised.
So we have this official, establishment, formal affirmation of the covenant again. And notice the phrasing there, with all your heart and all your soul. That's a phrase that comes up over and over in Deuteronomy, and it'll come up, we'll look at it again later, I believe. But it comes up over and over. The idea is that in this covenant, it's not enough to just do the law, right? It is actually God's asking for your whole heart to be after him. That's the goal. So I'll read 29, 1 through 15. If I can turn the page. There we go. These are the words of the covenant that the Lord commanded Moses to make with the Israelites in the land of Moab, which is right outside Israel. In addition to the covenant he had made with them at Horeb, down on Mount Sinai. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "You have seen with your own eyes everything the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his officials, to his entire land. You saw with your own eyes the great trials and those great signs and wonders. Yet to this day the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, eyes to see, or ears to hear. I led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes and the sandals on your feet did not wear out. You did not eat food or drink wine or beer, so that you might know that I am the Lord your God. When you reached this place, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out against us in battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it as an inheritance to the Reubenites, Gadites, half the tribe of Manasseh. Therefore, observe the words of this covenant and follow them, So you'll succeed in everything that you do. All of you are standing today before the Lord your God, your leaders, tribes, elders, officials, all the men of Israel, your dependents, wives, resident aliens in your camps who cut your wood and draw your water, so that you may enter into the covenant of the Lord your God, which he is making with you today, so that you may enter into his oath, so that he may establish you today as his people. He may be your God, as he promised you, and as he swore to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm making this covenant and this oath not only with you, but also with those who are standing with us here today, in the presence of the Lord our God, and those who are not here today. So this is literally the statement at which he's saying, you here, new covenant. We're doing it again, it's official. All right, and then lastly, chapter 30, verses 11 through 20.
This command that I give you today is certainly not too difficult or beyond your reach. It is not in heaven so that you have to ask, who will go up to heaven and get it for us and proclaim it to us so that we may follow it. And it is not across the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea and get it for us, proclaim it to us so that we may follow it. For the message is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you may follow it. See, today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I am commanding you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances, so that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God may bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not listen, and you are led astray to bow and worship to other gods and serve them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish, and will not prolong your days in the land you are entering to possess across the Jordan. I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. Love the Lord your God, obey him, and remain faithful to him. For he is your life, and he will prolong your days as you live in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Thank you. So we have again this idea of Moses saying, in this new covenant, you have a choice. It's not beyond your reach. You can do it. And so you must choose life or death. Will you love God, or when you enter this land, will you reject God by loving and following after idols? And we see both happen. In the book of Joshua, they're very obedient for the most part. In the book of Judges, they're very disobedient for the most part. They start worshiping idols and start facing consequences. So we see this play out in their history. To sort of like close out this theme, I want to look at Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Very famous. And it's the way that God places onto Israel the responsibility to pass along understanding of God's law, and again, to pass along the responsibility to choose God. Okay? Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. This is a famous phrase called the Shema. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates." Notice the difference in perspective from what we saw at the beginning of Hammurabi's code. There's a code that is so pragmatic, right? There's nothing about the heart. There's nothing about, pursue righteousness with your inner being. There's not that kind of conversation. But Deuteronomy consistently frames it as a covenant. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So we'll look at how some of these themes, or how some of Deuteronomy connects with the New Testament. See, Deuteronomy is actually the most quoted book in the New Testament, as far as Old Testament books go. Because in some ways it is, again, the clip notes of the rest of the law, so it's this easy, quick reference. Let's everyone turn to Deuteronomy 6 really quick, 2 verses there, and then 1 in Deuteronomy 8. So Deuteronomy 6:13, use the same colors here. Deuteronomy 6:13, 6:18, and then 8:3. All right, these may sound sort of familiar to you. Who can read 6:13 for me?
Fear the Lord your God, serve him only, and take your oath in his name.
All right. How about 6:16?
You shall not tempt the Lord your God as ye tempted him in Massah.
Thank you. And then 8:3.
And be humbled you and let you hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. They might make you known that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord.
So keep your finger right there in that section of the Bible. Then I want you to turn to the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to look at chapter 4. And see if anything sounds familiar in this passage.
Verse 4.
Yes, verse 4 is where we'll start. So actually, I'll read this for you from verse 1 through verse 11. We'll just read this whole section. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter approached him and said, "If you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And he answered, "It is written, man must not live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God." Really quick, what bread is it referring to in Deuteronomy? Manna. Jesus is essentially saying, I'm not going to make bread for myself because I somehow don't trust God. Right? Israel didn't trust God, they complained. Jesus was unwilling to follow the same temptation. Instead, he quotes Moses' own words about how Israel was supposed to live, and so he sort of passes the test. Verse 5, "Then the devil took him to the holy city, had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give angels orders concerning you. They will support you with their hands, so you will not strike your foot against a stone.'" That one's from Psalms. But the follow-up, verse 7, Jesus told him, "It is also written, do not test the Lord your God." So back in 6:16, where did they test the Lord before? In the wilderness. They tested God. God tested them, right? And they also tested God in a different sense. They didn't trust him. They complained. When they were struggling, they didn't believe that God would give them enough. But in this case, Jesus kind of like has a double entendre going on. He says, not only does Satan not get to test the Lord, or not only will Jesus himself not test God, but Satan shouldn't be testing him because he himself is God. And he's playing on the double meaning there as he quotes Deuteronomy. He is fulfilling the test Israel failed, and at the same time demonstrating that he himself is God. Lastly, verse 8 and following. "Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and said to him, 'I will give you all these things if you will fall down and worship me.' And then Jesus told him, 'Go away, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" So when Moses quotes that in Deuteronomy 6:13, what are the other things that they could worship? What were the other options that Moses was telling them to not worship? All the idols of the land of Canaan, of the promised land they were going into. In this case, who is it that shouldn't be worshipped? The devil. But also, who is it that should be worshipped? I think here we have the twist again. Right? It's not only Jesus saying, like, I'm not going to bow down to you because I'm going to worship God. It's not only that. It is, in fact, a way of saying, you should be bowing down to me. Right? So Jesus consistently takes these phrases of Deuteronomy, quotes them as understanding how one should behave toward anyone who's not God, and then also as an instruction, almost as Moses was giving instruction to Israel, to the readers and to the devil, what they should actually be doing. So Jesus perfectly fulfills the covenant obedience. All those stipulation stuff, things that they struggle to do in the wilderness, Jesus fulfills it. He is the ultimate, fullest, greatest son of Israel. And in him, all those things are fulfilled. All those tests are fulfilled. There's another theme here. So that's sort of, let's say, worshiping the Lord theme. Or Jesus as God kind of thing. But there's one more about the righteousness of the heart. So let's look at Deuteronomy 10:16. Okay, right. One second. Deuteronomy 10:16, and then 30. 1 and following, I'll read some of that, and then I need Romans 2:29, and also Romans 10:6-13. All right, who could do Deuteronomy? Deuteronomy, the second one, Deuteronomy 10:16.
Therefore, circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer.
Simple enough. That language of stiff neck and circumcision of the heart, right? It plays on the signal in the Old Testament, right? That to be a part of God's people, one had to be circumcised, had to have this physical sign that they are part of the group, and their family would be represented as that. But Paul, we'll see, plays on this idea a little bit. But even back here, Moses is saying the physical circumcision isn't even the point, ultimately. Right? It's kind of a thing that we do to demonstrate that we are actually following the Lord with our heart. All right, Deuteronomy 30. I'll read some of these verses here, and then we'll skip to Romans 2:29. When all these things happen to you, the blessings and curses I've set before you, and you come to your senses while you're among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, so he's prophesying about when they're exiled, and you and your children return to the Lord your God, and obey him with all your heart and all your soul, by doing everything I've commanded you today, then he will restore your fortunes. Jumping down to verse 6. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your descendants, and you will love him with all your heart and all your soul, so that you will live. And the Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies who hate you and persecute you. So again, we have this language. In this case, Moses is saying, there will come a day where you don't love the Lord with all your heart. And you'll be scattered among the nations because of it, but he will actually draw you back to him. Right, we actually talked about that a couple weeks ago with the theme of Exodus, exile, and then the new Exodus that Jesus brings. But this is talking about how God would do that even in the Old Testament. But let's look at Romans chapter 2 and see how Paul carries forward this theme into the New Testament. Romans chapter 2, verse 29. Somebody read that for us.
On the contrary, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart, by the Spirit, not the letter. That person's praise is not from people, but from God.
Okay, notice how Paul, he's speaking in chapter 2, it's focused on his Jewish brethren. Right? Chapter 1 is this sort of all Gentiles. But notice how he wants to define a person who is sort of a part of God's people. The way he wants to define that is a person who follows the Lord from the heart, who isn't someone who has an outward symbol of circumcision. And he makes this argument in Galatians 2 as well, like the book of Galatians as well, that it is not about these outward actions like the physical circumcision of the Old Testament or anything else to demonstrate your faith. It is about what's going on in your heart, and whether you have faith in God. That is what makes someone a member of God's people, a member of Israel in the Old Testament and the greater Israel, which is the church in the New Testament. Chapter 10, verses 6-13. Would you read those for us?
But the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your hearts, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame, for there's no distinction between Jew and Greek. For the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing the riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved.
Okay. So Paul multiple times in that little passage quotes the Old Testament, including Deuteronomy. The idea of the message is near you in your mouth and in your heart. It's from Deuteronomy 30, where Moses was saying to the Israelites, like, you can choose to pursue God. You can choose to follow God. And that choice in your heart is the one that leads to the promised land. And what Paul is doing is what all the New Testament authors do, especially you see in Hebrews, that the person who chooses to believe in the Lord and says, from the heart, Lord, says to Jesus, Lord, right, and confesses him, that is the choice. And that person becomes a part of God's people. That person becomes the saved and is promised the promised land of eternity, ultimately. That's the twist that happens in the New Testament. All of this discussion of choosing God, being a part of the old covenant in order to be in the promised land, is changed, is increased. So that if someone from the heart gets rid of all this, the stuff, and says, you know what, I'm choosing to identify with the Lord, with his people, in that case, they are counted as righteous and saved and promised eternal life. So as we wrap up our study of Deuteronomy and the books of Moses, I want you to see overall, just thinking back over all the sessions, that the books of Moses are foundational in order to understand the fullness of what we're looking at when we get in the New Testament. We talked before about how the new covenant happens in the New Testament, right? We had a newish covenant even in Deuteronomy, right? But it's expanded when we get to the New Testament. And all of these books help us see that Jesus not only is the one God who we are alone to serve and worship, but he's the only one that can be our sacrifice. He's the one that makes a new covenant in his blood. He's the one that we can have fellowship with. He's the one that we are to love with our hearts and to worship alone. And it's a call to us to recognize him, appreciate what he's done, and to commit ourselves, especially in Numbers and Deuteronomy with the focus on disobedience and obedience, to commit ourselves to him even further. And we have all of these stories to educate us on what it means to pursue the Lord and not to walk away. Any final questions or thoughts on the books of Moses as we run out of time here?
Explain circumcision of the heart.
Sure. So in the Old Testament, circumcision is obviously a medical procedure. What people do that here? Okay. So obviously the medical genitalia is circumcised in a certain way. Skin is removed. And in the Old Testament times, that would have made you stand out among the rest of society or other cultures, which didn't do that. Right? So it was cutting away the extra as a physical symbol of I'm in faith with God and covenant with God. In the New Testament, that shifts, and Paul starts to say, the thing that makes you part of God's people and identify with God is not some external action. It's never a work that you do. It's not something like baptism that gets you in. Right? It's not something like baptism that even makes you part of Christ. Now, baptism is important, and it symbolizes our connection with God's people. But our connection with Christ, our identification with Christ, comes when we are willing to let all the extra be cut off of our hearts, is the logic, right? The way that all those other things we've loved or that identify us with the world, so to speak, the fallenness of creation, sin, that type of stuff, we're no longer identifying with. We're choosing to be different. And God, in that moment, circumcises our heart.
Good.
Okay? Anything else?
Can you talk more about circumcision?
I heard it also explained as a deep cutting in your heart of a deep belief
Sure.
in your heart.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And I mean, the original circumcision, there would have been pain, there would have been struggle, there would have been difficulty, right? And in the New Testament, when it comes to committing yourself to the Lord, identifying with the Lord, and getting rid of the old way, there's a pain that's associated with that, with identifying with Him and no longer your old self. So it's like changing identities, essentially. But you just do that inwardly, by faith, rather than outwardly.
Were there other codes to pick from besides, armed robbery?
Yeah. There are. There are lots of other ancient law codes. This is just the most famous instance. But yeah, there are others, for sure.
Where is that, Hammurabi, where is that from?
It's from Babylonia,
Babylon.
from Babylon, the ancient sort of version of it, some of the earliest parts of Babylon.
And
Anything
when a
else?
cop pulled you over there, he told you I'm citing you for number 192.
Yes, that's right. That's right. If only we only had 282 laws today. Wouldn't that be great, Chris?
Good luck. The law may, if you weighed it, it might weigh 282 tons.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's right. Anything else before I let you go? Alright, well, let me pray for you guys, and we'll see you soon. Lord, thank you for the chance to meet together with these folks over the last few weeks, to learn about your word, the beginnings of your word, the books of Moses, and Lord, I pray that in seeing this foundational content, that it prepares us not only to understand the Old Testament as it is, but also to understand the New, to understand what it means for you to come and fulfill all these symbols, all these figures, all these types, when you came in the New Testament, what it means for us in our faith to follow your lead, to be like you, and to have faith in you, just as you had faith when you were here on earth in God Himself. Lord, we now worship you as God. You demonstrated that's who you always were, and Lord, we want to stay focused on that and pursue you with all of our heart, all of our soul, and not be drawn aside into our old way of life, but Lord, to cut that away and identify with you and you alone moving forward. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Hey, Corbin, Kirk has a question.
Yeah?
How'd they know if you were circumcised or not? I mean,